thank you everybody for registering. We have a great amount of people already dialed in. We have more than 180 participants so far. We have 530 registrations, so the topic seems to be on everybody's mind, which is not unsurprising, considering that next year companies will have to report against the German Supply Chain Act. So this is the topic of our webinar, reporting obligations under the German Supply Chain Act. My name is Francis Wimmer, Stakeholder Engagement Advisor at Amfori, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. Maybe before I go into this, next slide, please. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. So you all participants, you are on mute. If you have a question, please just pop them into the chat on the right side. The webinar will be recorded, and we will also be sharing the slides with you after the webinar, and as well as a brief satisfaction survey just to see, what we can improve going forward. Now, what are we looking at today? This is a bit also a follow-up to a multi-stakeholder dialogue on risks and opportunities surrounding the European corporate sustainability due diligence legislation, which we organized in May in Berlin. Also, the German PST was present then, as well as a number of participants also here today. So back then, what we wanted to do is to really also focus on prevention and remediations, to really discuss these two requirements of the German Supply Chain Act, but also, of course, of the European corporate sustainability due diligence legislation, as both of them are to a large extent aligned with the due diligence steps. And here, basically, now we want to focus specifically on reporting, which is, of course, another requirement. And before going into that, we have our president here with us today, Linda Kromjong, who will give you a bit of an opening remark statement. Then that's followed by Michaela Streibelt, advisor at the Helpdesk on Business and Human Rights. She will be talking about the German Supply Chain Act at a high level, outline the requirements, but then really focusing on the due diligence and reporting obligations. Then we have a bit of a Q&A. And then after that, my colleague Erika Sock, who's our services programs expert, will be speaking about our human rights environmental due diligence project and how Amfori supports you with your due diligence requirements or obligations, also on reporting. Isabel Reichenbach also will outline the German PST's Partnership for Sustainable Textiles offering in this regard. And then we have another brief Q&A before we come to the closing remarks, also by the German PST. Unfortunately, Nur Nakshbandi was not able to make it, but he's replaced by Andreas Edele, who's here with us today. Thank you again, Andreas, for jumping in on such short notice. And in that sense, welcome everybody. I'll hand over to our president, Linda Kromjong, for her opening remarks. Linda, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francis, and welcome all. My name is Linda Kromjong, and I joined Amfori as its president on 1st of January this year, and it has been a pleasure working with a great team and strong motivated members, business partners, as well as stakeholders. Our diverse network connects and drives positive impact. Amfori is equipping our member companies across the globe with tools that enable them to meet environmental, social, and governance due diligence standards, as well as expectations of their supply chain, and hence empower them to operate successful and responsible businesses. At the core of what we do is continuous improvement. Capacity building is instrumental to support the business partners of our members in their supply chain to learn and improve. Founded as the Foreign Trade Association in 1977, Amfori has more than 40 years of experience in the space of trade. amfori BECI was initiated in 2003 by a group of companies who were working to improve the social performance of the supply chain. When they realized that they were sourcing from the same factories or farms, they understood what the power of collaboration really meant and how they could be using collective leverage to induce positive changes. Next year, 2023, amfori will celebrate 20 years of amfori BECI. Over this period of time, our members have voluntarily committed to improve the supply chain, and as a result have accumulated a wealth of practical experience on due diligence. We started with social sustainability, but with amfori BECI, we then decided to also push forward environmental considerations within the supply chain. Today, amfori counts more than 2,500 members, out of which our German members represent a significant share, and 27,000 business partners engage in a broad offering supporting companies to meet their due diligence obligations. Advocacy has always been one of our key products and a critical component underpinning every aspect of our work. We were the first business association speaking in favor of legislation, human rights, and environmental due diligence, as we believe in a good and smart mix of measures, voluntary and mandatory. That's what it should be. While we welcome the German Supply Chain Act, we are advocating for legislation at EU level that is closely aligned with the UNGPs on business human rights and the OECD guidelines for responsible business conduct. What is our approach on transparency-related legislation? We welcome the BAFA's, the Federal Office for Economic Affairs and Export Control, recent release of the catalogue of questions for reporting on the German Supply Chain Act, or Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. amfori believes that supply chain transparency is a powerful tool for promoting accountability, respecting workers' rights in supply chain, and ensuring continuous improvement. And that is why we'll work with our members, encourage and enable them to increase the transparency of the supply chain, and in particular the work they're doing with amfori. Via our tools, we also enable them to disclose meaningful information about the supply chain and the impact they have. And we will continue to encourage and incentivize our members to increase their transparency, as we view this as an important part of their due diligence efforts. Along those lines, we have strengthened commitment on transparency in the new amfori BECI Code of Conduct within the context of identification, prevention, and remediation of adverse human rights and environmental impacts. amfori has also made a pledge to increase the visibility and transparency of social and environmental conditions in supply chain. This includes commitments on, amongst others, increasing the number of innovative initiatives for traceability in supply chain and on developing new features in amfori BECI and amfori BECI on traceability. To put this commitment into action, we collaborate with our partners, the Open Supply Hub and ZDHC, and our wider ecosystem for stakeholders who will share information and technologies throughout the supply chain. A level playing field for companies is critical, and which is why amfori welcomes the EU Commission's proposal for corporate sustainability reporting and the corporate sustainability reporting directives. We are committed to work collaboratively with our members, business partners, and stakeholders to accelerate positive impact. Together, we can turn ESG disclosure into an opportunity for businesses and to show the impacts they drive on the world. Thank you very much. I'm handing over to my colleague, Francis Wilmer, who is moderating today's sessions. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Linda, for these opening remarks. I will not say anything further. I will just hand straight over to Michaela. Michaela will be presenting us very briefly at a high level the requirements of the German Supply Chain Act, but really focusing on the reporting obligations that companies have, with a specific focus, of course, on the BAFA questionnaire. So, Michaela, handing over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francis. And without further ado, I'd like to jump in immediately and show you on the next couple of slides who we are, the German Helpdesk Business and Human Rights, so you know where I'm coming from, to whom you're listening right now. So we're a government offer free of charge for businesses and trade associations that assist in implementing human rights due diligence processes. We're financed by the German Ministry for Economic Collaboration and Development and being implemented by two organizations, the GIZ, you might have heard of them, and the KfW-DEG. On the next slide, I want to give you a quick overview of our activities. I've already mentioned that we are free of charge offer by the German government. The free of charge advice is the main focus of our work, but we have a couple of other things that we're doing, for example, training programs, events, and online services. For the training programs, we both assist businesses in designing their own training programs to train their staff, but we also go to businesses and hold trainings that are tailor-made for the business's needs. We participate in events like today when we're being invited, but we also have different event formats of our own where we try to foster dialogue between different actors, for example, between businesses among themselves, but also businesses and civil society actors or actors from the political sphere. And then we have a few online services that are all free of charge, and maybe you might have heard of them already. Our tool SME Compass was recently expanded by a second component, the Standards Compass, of which we are very proud. In this tool, you can, as of now, compare how much 20 different standards feed into a due diligence process. So how much of the UNGP how they perform under the UNGP to see it. How can you choose a standard for yourself? And we plan on expanding it to over 300 standards, but also provide some guidance as to what limitations of standards are, and how you can look at a standard that particularly fits your needs. Then we have our tool CSR Risk Check, with which you can identify potential risks in supply chains. And our last tool, Business and Human Rights Navigator, is a tool with which you can look at 10 selected human rights issues from the sphere of business and human rights, but also look at how you can address specific issues in the specific phases of the due diligence process. So if you don't know them yet, I can, I would suggest you have a look at them. Now I'll give some general remarks on the German Due Diligence in Supply Chains Act, then some general information on reporting, and lastly I'll give you a little overview of the questionnaire so you know what to expect when reporting to the BAFA. Quickly to the next slide, a brief overview over the key points of the Due Diligence in Supply Chains Act. So I'm probably not going to go into all these aspects of it because not all of them are relevant, I think, today. The law prescribes a due diligence management system to companies that we like to break down onto 5 key elements. You could also divide it into 4 or 6. It's kind of a question of what you prefer and how you connect the different elements to one another. We always work with 5 because that corresponds to the German National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. And the 5 elements, you can see it on the slides, it's a policy statement or implementation of a policy, risk analysis, preventive and remedial measures, complaints procedure, and reporting. The due diligence obligations apply in the supply chain, and the law divides the supply chain for this purpose into 3 spheres: own operations, direct suppliers, and indirect suppliers. In relation to indirect suppliers, obligations under the law are only created if a specific level, a threshold of knowledge is reached. That under the law is called a substantiated knowledge. So if there's an actual indication that suggests a violation. What's really important to know about this law, and this is something that the law has in common with other legislative acts that prescribe due diligence obligations, it also has to do with the nature of them being due diligence obligations. They are duties of effort, and there's no obligation for companies to guarantee that their supply chains or value chains are free of human rights and environmental risks or violations. Instead, they need to implement a system with which they proactively try to identify these risks and violations and then address them without having to guarantee that the ways how they address them actually lead to success. The affected companies, yes, you might know that the law will enter, the obligations under the law will enter into effect for businesses with at least 3,000 employees in Germany. A year later, the threshold is lowered to at least 1,000 employees in Germany. The law does not apply to, generally doesn't apply to businesses that are not German businesses. There's an exception for foreign companies that have a trade branch and reach the thresholds, but this is rather an exception. Yes, I've already spoken about, kind of touched upon the material scope of the obligations, so it relates to human rights and environmental obligations. Civil liability is not being changed by the law. And the law is being implemented, we've heard this already, by the BAFA, the Federal Office of Economics and Export Control, which is also the competent authority to which businesses will have to address their reports when reporting. Okay, the next slide, I'm going to continue with the reporting obligations. Yes, so the law requires businesses to, first of all, document their activities continuously internally and keep these records for 7 years at least. And then they have to provide an annual report the latest 4 months after the end of a business year. So a business year doesn't have to be identical with the calendar. So it's possible that businesses have to submit a report that doesn't match the calendar year, and especially in relation to the first report that they might be submitting. The questionnaire, we will see this later as well, allows for companies to explain why they haven't completed certain processes. So let's imagine a business with 3,000 employees falls under the law on 1st of January 2023, but has a business year that reaches from 1st of July of every year until 30th of June. In this case, the first report will have to cover 1st of January 2023 until 30th of June 2023, and the report must be submitted 4 months after that, so until 31st of October 2023. But the report will only cover half the year and will also address procedures that are not completed yet, which is okay under the law. And for other companies that have a calendar year that's identical with the, have a business year that's identical with the calendar year, this does not apply. Yes, the report has to be made available on the company's website and electronically transmitted to the BAFA. Companies are not required to report on confidential information, so they don't have to share this information in the report, neither to the public nor to the competent authority. And under specific conditions, companies have the right to refuse to give information. This is the case when the individuals submitting the report would put themselves at risk of prosecution from the state prosecutor, or prosecution in relation to not a crime but an administrative offense, or would put close family members at the same risk. Yes, and the BAFA checks whether the report has been submitted and complies with the standards. Yeah, next slide, please. Yes, so the contents of the report, you see it on the slide. The BAFA requires, and the law requires, comprehensible reporting, and the reporting must cover four issues: identified human rights and environmental risks, the measures with which the business reacts to these risks, an evaluation of the effectiveness of the measures, and then conclusions the business draws from this effectiveness assessment. It's also possible, although I think it must be very unlikely, that the company does not identify any risks or violations. In this case, they also have to report, but by means of a shortened report, and provide plausible explanation for why they haven't identified any risks or violations. Yes, I've already mentioned that the reporting has to be done via like electronically. The BAFA for this purpose will provide for an online mask that has to be made available in spring of 2023. And the idea behind the questionnaire that the BAFA has created for this purpose is that it translates the requirements of the law that I've just mentioned into easily understandable questions. And the design of the questions considers the diversity of corporate realities, especially in relation to the first year of reporting. So the case that I've just mentioned, in case a company has to report mid-year or has to report over only part of a year because the business year is not aligned with the calendar year. In this context, though, I have to mention that the BAFA does not understand 2023 as a test year. So we're talking of obligations under a law that are connected to sanctions. So starting on 1st of January 2023, many of the obligations under the law have to be fulfilled. And yeah, the BAFA will not, the BAFA will look at the diversity of realities in relation to reporting mid-year or reporting over unfinished procedures because of not aligned business year, but that doesn't mean that in other contexts companies can just say, okay, we're going to test this situation and we've only done half of this when the calendar year and the business year are aligned. So 2023 is not a test year. The mechanism of the questionnaire, and I'll show it a little bit more in detail later when I'll show you examples from the questionnaire, contains free text fields, closed questions, and multiple choice questions. And the mechanism of the questionnaire is that you always have to say what you have done, but then also explain how you've done it exactly, or how you've, in this context, considered something specifically. And so the questionnaire provides for a comply and explain mechanism. The questionnaire also allows for a selective upload in at specific fields of other reports and documents, but other reports and documents do not replace the report according to section 10, paragraph 2. So, for example, the report under the NFRD or CSRD cannot be used to replace the report under section 10, paragraph 2. And this report is also the report that the businesses will have to be make available towards the public on their website. So I haven't seen the online mask yet because it's not available yet, but the way I imagine it is that after using the questionnaire in the online mask, you'll be able to create an excerpt from it, maybe in a PDF file format, and then this can be used to upload it on the company's website. Right, so at this moment, we're going to do a mini poll to get a quick overview over what your situation is in relation to reporting, sustainability reporting more in general. And we have 3 questions. You can see them on the slide that we'd like you to answer. The first one is, are you already reporting under the NFRD? They're all yes or no questions, or you can also, of course, say you don't know, you're not sure. Will you be governed by the CSRD reporting obligations? So the revised NFRD, basically. And then will you be governed by the German Due Diligence in Supply Chains Act and its reporting obligations? Okay, so I'm not sure if the polls are already coming in. I'm gonna don't think I'm gonna see this.
Yes,
we'll wait.
there.
Okay, excellent.
Maybe I also take this time to just quickly point out the fact that you can drop your questions in the Q&A section on the bottom. So there's a Q&A button just below in the bar. So do not write them in the chat. As I pointed out in the beginning, the chat apparently is disabled for the participants, so you can post your questions in the Q&A session, QA section.
Okay, so maybe we can already have a look at the polls. Ah, excellent. Okay, I don't know if everyone is seeing them. I'm seeing some. So regarding the first question, about 10% already reporting under the NFRD. This is really interesting. So 90% are not reporting under the NFRD. And in relation to the CSRD, it's about a third each. So 31% will be governed, 38% will not be governed, and another 31% don't know if they will be governed by the CSRD. And in relation to the German Due Diligence and Supply Chains Act, it's quite similar. 33% will be governed by the Act, 40% will not, and another 26% are not sure. Okay, with this in mind, I'd like to continue and give you an overview of examples from the questionnaire that the BAFA provides for the purpose of reporting. And I'll start with giving you an overview over the questionnaire. So unfortunately, the BAFA not yet has published the questionnaire in English. They have already published one of their guidance documents in relation to the risk analysis in English. And I've heard that they plan to translate all the guidances into English and a few other languages, but they haven't yet released the questionnaire in English. So what I'm going to show you is my own translations of the questions, and the structure of the questionnaire is quite similar to the structure of the due diligence obligations. There's one chapter of the questionnaire, strategy and implementation, then one risk analysis and preventive measures, then identifications of violations and corrective measures, one on the complaints procedure, and then one on the effectiveness assessment and the conclusions drawn from this effectiveness assessment. I've heard complaints in events and when I was speaking to businesses that the questionnaire is too long, and there's a rumor going on that the questionnaire allegedly has 428 questions. I can tell you this is not correct. The numbers in the questionnaire are for each line of the questionnaire, and many of the multiple choice questions have sometimes 40 options how you can answer them, and then obviously you'll have a lot of lines because each line is assigned a number. This is a bit unfortunate, but overall the questionnaire is is a size that can be used. The whole document has 38 pages in the PDF file, including a glossary, an introduction, and a table of contents and a cover page. So from that you can see it's impossible that it's 428 questions. And even if you're not governed by the German law, but you're looking into how you can implement due diligence processes, it might be interesting for you to look at the questionnaire, because I believe that the questionnaire is very well suited to run a gap analysis, because the way the questions are designed are really helpful, and to find out what do I have already in place and where are my gaps, what do I have to still do. And the questions also are designed in a way that they don't really let you off the hook by saying yes, 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 or no, 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 and then explain in a free text field, or I'm doing it this way. But instead the question really drill into the subject matter by asking you very specifically how you do certain things. Yes, with that in mind, I'll start with the first set of questions. I've tried to find questions from each section of the report. You'll see that, and I've chosen questions that, in my opinion, very well illustrate how the mechanism of the questionnaire works, but also that illustrate really well what the expectation of the BAFA is, not only in relation to reporting, but also in relation to the actual implementation of the due diligence obligations. Yes, and here this one is from chapter 80, basically implementation of the strategy. And here the question is, you can of course all read that yourselves. In which relevant departments, business processes did you ensure the implementation of the human rights strategy within the reporting period? And then you have a couple of options what you can answer. But then this is how the questionnaire doesn't really let you off the hook. if at least one of the answers from 90, here you see also the line numbers, to 107 was selected, describe, and then a couple of follow-up questions, and you have to answer all of them in the free text field. Specifically, describe how the responsibility for the implementation of a strategy is distributed among different specialist departments or business processes. Describe how the strategy is integrated into operative processes and procedures. Describe which resources and what expertise are provided for the implementation into procedures. So here you can see, you can't just click through, okay, I'm doing this, and then describe, oh, this is how I'm doing it, without actually addressing these specific questions. So it illustrates really well how the questionnaire combines multiple choice and free text answering options, and also this comply and explain mechanism, as well as that the BAFA expects businesses to describe resources and expertise that are used for the implementation. So the next question I've chosen, I'm going through all the different sections of the questionnaire from section B. So it's on risk analysis and preventive measures. This question is, did you conduct a regular annual risk analysis during the reporting period to identify, weigh, and prioritize human rights and environmental risks? Okay, you can say yes regarding own operations, yes regarding direct suppliers, and then you can say no. And then this is a really good example for what I've mentioned in relation to businesses that have to report on half a year or on just a couple of months of a year, because their business year is not aligned with the calendar year. You can say, of course, in other contexts, if you have a business year that's identical with the calendar year, and you do a report on 12 months for the first report, you can of course also say no, but this would probably lead to a fine. But there's the option to account for the realities of these businesses that I've just mentioned. And if they answer no, they can justify their answer. And then but also if you've just said yes, so they don't let you get away with it, you also have to describe. And you have to describe two things: which period did you conduct the annual risk analysis, and how did you do it? So describe the procedure of the risk analysis. So again, comply and explain. The BAFA expects businesses not only to say that they did a risk analysis, but to actually describe the procedure with which they conducted their risk analysis. Yes, so I have another question from section B, in relation this time not to the risk analysis, but in relation to preventive measures. So which preventive measure did you implement to prevent and minimize prioritized risks within your own operations? You might remember that the own operations is one of the spheres into which the law divides the supply chain and prescribes due diligence obligations. And here again, you have a couple of multiple choice answers. Including no preventive measures, and then again, in case you selected no, you can justify your answer, and then if you selected any of the other options, which also includes a combination of multiple choice and free text. So here the questionnaire accounts for businesses having designed other preventive measures that the BAFA has not mentioned in the questionnaire. You can also do that, but then you have to describe a couple of things. And one aspect here I'd like to highlight is the last of the three aspects that need to be described in each case. So the line number 178, describe how the interests of potentially affected persons or the legitimate representatives were considered in designing and implementing the measures. And this is one aspect that is really emphasized by the questionnaire, but is also a really important aspect in the German Due Diligence and Supply Chains Act in general. It's kind of a bit outside of the brackets. The due consideration of the interests of potentially affected persons is mentioned in a section in relation to the general requirements of the due diligence system, but because it's a requirement in relation to the system, it of course also applies to all the individual elements of the system in this example in relation to the preventive measures, but it also applies to all the other aspects. So businesses are required to describe the due consideration of the interests of affected persons in relation to implementation of the strategy, in relation to the risk analysis, and also in relation to corrective measures, to the complaints procedure, effectiveness monitoring, and so on. And you can also see this translated into the questionnaire very well. Yes, here I have another example in relation to the risk analysis. And here as well, you can see how this comply and explain method applies, and that there's a requirement to the risk analysis procedure. I'm sorry, I think I've already shown you this slide, and it might be a duplicate. I'm going to skip this one, go to the next. Sorry. Yes, here I have another example from the chapter on effectiveness assessment for the reporting period. And there again, you have a combination of multiple choice and free text with the option of saying yes and no. In case of no, you need to justify, but in case of yes, you need to describe a few elements. So how feedback of internal and external stakeholders was considered in the assessment, how the effectiveness was measured, and which conclusions were drawn in relation to the effectiveness, and which measures were derived from these conclusions. So again, an example for integrating feedback of internal and external stakeholders, and how this multiple choice and free text comply and explain mechanism works. I think I have one more example, I think. Yes, and this is an example from the assessment of the risk management and conclusions section of the report. Here's the question: is there a process to analyze whether the risk management overall assesses the adequacy, effectiveness, and adequate consideration of the interests of potentially affected persons? So here again, the interest of potentially affected persons has to be considered. You have the option to answer yes and no. In case of no, you need to justify. In case of yes, you can now, again, in multiple choice, choose different answering options to answer the question: which areas of the risk management were analyzed in relation to adequacy and effectiveness? And then you have the option to, if you did not select any areas, justify your answer. And if you selected any, and describe how you conducted the risk assessment. So yes, this illustrates really well the comply and explain again, and then the requirement to describe the procedure of the assessment. I think this was the last of the examples I wanted to share with you, and I think this is, I think hopefully you have a good overview of what the BAFA expects of you in relation to reporting. And yes, I think I've stretched my time limits a little bit, but I hope there's still some time to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I really appreciate it. Excellent presentation. We have a bunch of questions in the Q&A section, so let's get straight to the questions or to the discussion. So first one was already answered to an extent by our president. So what that relates to when this regulation is expected to become an EU requirement. We have quite a few participants here that are not German companies. So in that sense, it's not an unsurprising question. As Linda said, indeed, the EU legislation is still currently in the making. So the proposal came out by the European Commission in February. Now the Parliament is in the process of reacting to that proposal, or has already reacted to that proposal. And that negotiation phase between Parliament, European Commission, and Council can take, quite some time. Can estimate around 1.5 years. And by the time that legislation is then finally passed by the Council and the European Parliament, then of course it needs to be translated into national legislation. So we can expect this to not be before 2024 or even later. But with these things, there's no prediction as to when exactly it will come out. We can only give a rough estimate. Next question relates to whether the right to refuse to provide information in the report also include instances where the company has violated against the German Supply Chain Act, which could put the company at risk to be investigated under the Ordnungswidrigkeitengesetz, which is the Act on Regulatory Offenses. I had to look that up, but yeah. So Manuela, do you want to say something? Michaela, you want to say something about that?
Yes, to my understanding, this is covered by the exemption to provide information, because I can't remember the English term for that, but this is a general constitutional right to, that forbids the state to force individuals into a situation in which they have to provide information that will then be used to prosecute them either criminally or for an administrative offense. And the way the provision under the German Diligence and Supply Chains Act is phrased as Section 17, paragraph 3, it's quite clear that it both covers these two. So yeah.
All right, thanks for the clarification. Then, yeah, there was a question around where this can be accessed. The questionnaire, Linda was kind enough to also share this, so you can see the link also in the answered section of the Q&A section. Then another question related to yeah, so this is a non-German company, I'm assuming. So here it says, I believe that in a certain way we are all governed by this question mark, if not directly, then at least indirectly by being part of somebody's supply chain who's directly governed by the legislation. This, in fact, I mean, is not really the focus of the webinar, but indeed, this is something that, you know, came up quite a lot in, you know, the preparation of the webinar. So we also allowed you to ask some questions as part of the registration form. And this is a question that kept coming up. So, you know, this is something where we also discussed the possibility to organize a separate session just dedicated to this particular issue, because it's a very big issue that, you know, deserves more attention and more discussion. So in that sense, I would leave it at that. But Michaela, if you want to still say maybe a few things here, of course, fully aware that, you know, this is not something you can cover in a few sentences. That's why, indeed, it might merit a separate webinar, a follow-up webinar on this. But yeah, want to add something?
I mean, just one little piece of advice for businesses that are not governed by the Act, because they're either not German businesses or because they're too small to be governed. Of course, it has effects on these businesses, but it doesn't mean that you need to accept everything that you get asked by your German customers who are governed by the law. The idea of the law is not that they just hand down the obligations of the law down into their supply chains, but instead, to some extent, of course, the standards that have to be met, they're supposed to monitor that their suppliers meet them, but it doesn't mean that they can give the obligation to implement a due diligence management system that is their obligation down to their suppliers. So you should, when discussing with your customers, when having these discussions, it's really important to look at what exactly are obligations that they can give to you, and where's your margin of negotiation to maybe defend yourself also in situations where they're asking too much from you, especially when they're just having demands without also wanting to support you, because that's also the idea behind the law, is that businesses that are governed by the law actually do the work.
Yeah, indeed. Another question that also seems to enjoy quite some popularity because it got a lot of likes is about the annual reporting company obligations, whether companies have to use the BAFA form or if they can use their own formats that meet the substantial requirements of Section 10. So yeah, Michaela.
Yeah, I mean, I would strongly advise you to use the BAFA questionnaire. I know there is, in the legal community, there's dispute in relation to as to whether the BAFA questionnaire is binding. You could discuss this at length. The thing is, if you don't use the BAFA questionnaire and the courts should come to the conclusion it's not binding. It will be made binding very soon by regulation that the federal ministries will draft, because the law allows them to specify how reporting has to be made by means of a regulation. So you could try if you don't want to use the BAFA questionnaire, but I wouldn't do it, because sooner or later you'll have to use it, and then there might be other problems stemming from not using it.
Yeah. Next question. Given the business year of our company is alike to the calendar year and the company has more than 3,000 employees, from my understanding, the first report needs to cover the business year 2023. So the first report is required to be published latest in April 2024. Is that correct?
Yeah, the latest 30th of April 2024, so 4 months after the end of the business year.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Then there's a question on the example of B1. So the example question, I don't know if Elsie, you want to go back to that slide with the example questionnaire B1. So how about indirect suppliers? Are they part of other parts of section B1?
Yes, they are. Yeah. So I would have to scroll in the questionnaire to the, yes, I have it. For example, question B4 contains a couple of questions in relation to preventive measures in relation to indirect suppliers. And then in section C, corrective measures, you also have questions in relation to indirect suppliers. So I've mentioned obligations under the Act in relation to indirect suppliers exist only when a certain threshold of knowledge is reached. So if there's actual indications for a violation of human rights and environmental obligations. And in many contexts, we know that the knowledge threshold is actually reached. So in many high-risk countries or high-risk branches, the knowledge threshold we can consider it already reached. And in this context, you need to also conduct a risk analysis and then react depending on what you discovered with preventive and corrective measures.
Thank you. Then another question on just setting the context. So most human rights risks are present in the entire supply chain, but it seems that the questions refer to own operations and direct suppliers. Does the law actually also mean that you need to go further down? Yes.
Yes, sorry, yeah, the examples I've chosen did not cover any questions in relation to indirect suppliers. Maybe I should have provided an example of this as well. But yes, the law also provides for obligations, as I mentioned just now, when this knowledge threshold is reached, and then companies have to conduct a risk analysis, react with measures, and so on. And so yeah, you should not. I know there's a tendency, at least this is what I get from conversations I have with businesses. There's a tendency to just look at tier 1. Because of this mechanism of the law of prescribing obligations only only when the knowledge threshold is reached. But this is a really difficult or dangerous situation for companies to put themselves in. I would really advise you to broaden your scope and look also a little bit deeper into the supply chain, at least in contexts when you have knowledge of problems, to not risk sanctions.
Yeah. Thank you. Then there's a question on the verification of these reports. So what if the information disclosed is not aligned with the actual situation?
I'm not sure if I can answer this question because I don't have any knowledge on how the BAFA is going to verify this. Also, the BAFA is not going to release how they're going to verify reports, and they're also not going to release how they're going to identify companies for their in-depth control measures. So in addition to analyzing, verifying the reports, the BAFA also conducts controls of businesses and selects businesses on a random but also on a risk-based approach. So we'll select or prioritize companies where they think they are the biggest problems. And the BAFA is not going to release their methodology on how they're going to identify these companies, neither in relation to the report nor in relation to the controls independent of the report, because they don't want to give companies information that they can then use to just report in a way to avoid further checkups.
Yeah, thank you. Then how much detailing is required in this free text bit, so where you have to describe? So could it be in a page or even a paragraph? Are there any expectations of detailing that?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, the law requires comprehensive reporting. The expectation of the BAFA is that the report must be understandable from the report itself without consulting further further information, for example, on the company's website, etc. And yeah, depending on the question that's being asked, it really depends on how much it has to be for it to comprehensively answer this question. To my understanding, it's generally not required to upload documents, but you can do so in some parts of the questionnaire.
And there's a question around, whether companies have to use the questionnaire for their suppliers as well.
Yes, I don't think that would be a good idea. And this also relates back to the question in relation to, isn't this affecting all of us regardless of whether we fall within the scope of the law? And there's an important distinction to be made. The questionnaire of the BAFA assesses whether the company implemented a solid and sound management system, due diligence management system. What the companies need to do in relation to their suppliers is not to look at whether they have a due diligence management system. This is not at all the point of the law. What they have to do in relation to their suppliers is to look at whether human rights and environmental obligations are negatively impacted, actually negatively impacted or potentially negatively impacted by their suppliers. And so a questionnaire that would look at impacts created by these suppliers would be far more suited than the questionnaire from the BAFA. And also when we're talking about handing down of obligations, I sometimes hear stories of German companies asking their suppliers to sign in a code of conduct, I comply with the German Due Diligence and Supply Chains Act. It's like, okay, what does this even mean for a company that's not within the scope? I'm not sure. But also, again, the law prescribes a management system. This is not the point. This is not the point to say, oh, comply with the law. It's like comply with no child labor, no more serious forms of child labor, no forced labor, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And that links a little bit to the next question from a Dutch company delivering to German customers. And the question is how transparent they should be when their customers ask them for information regarding their supply chain, considering that they need to do their risk analysis. Yeah.
So first of all, it's important to know you're under no obligation to comply at all, legally speaking. And I'm clarifying this because we're being asked this a lot by companies, especially when it's small and medium-sized companies in Germany that are also already feeling the effects of the law because of their big customers asking all kinds of things. And in relation to this is legally you're not obliged. There might be other reasons why it would make sense to comply with such requests, but it's important to look at what kind of information does your German customer actually need for their own risk analysis, and what information do you not want to give to them because that would put you at risk of being excluded in the supply chain. As a first step for the risk analysis, the German company does not, for example, need to know any information that would make your suppliers identifiable to them. And only if they identify risks or violations that would necessitate measures by this German company that would then need them to know the identity of the supplier, only then this would become a question. So it's important sometimes to know the mechanism of the law as well, to understand, okay, in what context can they reasonably ask me to support them, with what specifically, and where are boundaries that I should insist on.
No, no. Okay, we are running a bit over. There's many questions. I would maybe give another two. I'm really sorry for the ones that we haven't been able to address. Maybe, Michaela, while we are moving on to the other presentations, you could respond to some of them very briefly in writing. I'll add two more, which maybe you could try to reply to briefly. So the first one is, do the replies to the questionnaire automatically fulfill the reporting obligation, or is the sole purpose of the questionnaire to be of help?
No, the questionnaire at the moment as it was published, it's not going to fulfill the reporting obligation because you will have to use this online forms, but in the online forms there will be the exact same questions. So now it's been released to be of help, but it will be also the same questionnaire with which companies will do their first reporting. And then I can of course imagine that throughout the years it will be adjusted.
And then does a questionnaire actually generate an automatic report, or can it be does it have to be created separately? I think the answer is yes, it's automatically generated. And then,
to my understanding, so none of us have seen the online forms yet because it doesn't exist yet, but we've spoken to BAFA as well, and this is also their understanding and their wish in relation to the online forms, that it'll allow for a creation of a report that then can be used.
And then the question, what has to be there by the 1st of January 2023 to be in compliance with the German Supply Chain Act?
Yeah, so you might have seen, maybe you've looked at the law already, or have seen other presentations in relation to the law. Some things depend on the risk analysis, and then some things have to be there 1st of January 2023, which is the management system with its responsibilities clearly defined and its procedures clearly defined and so on. The complaints procedure has to be there as well, and the system with which you document has to be ready so you can start documenting. But then the risk analysis has to be conducted in the first year, and so it doesn't mean that you have to have the risk analysis completed 1st of January 2023 or start doing it on 1st of January 2023, but do it at some point within the year 2023. I would suggest maybe not do it on 31st of December 2023, because then you're not going to finish, and also not do it so super late, because it might be very helpful for you and the design of your system to have some information from the risk analysis, but like legally speaking, you can do it at some point in the year. And then the preventive and corrective measures are tied to not only but also the results of the risk analysis. So if you identify risks and violations, you need to react with measures. So you don't have to conduct any measures yet on January 2023, but of course you can also get information in relation to violations, for example, through your complaints procedure. So it's a good idea to be prepared and have a system design that also includes like what type of reactions, what is my portfolio of preventive and corrective measures that I'll react with in case something comes up.
All right, thank you so much, Michaela. It was super informative, really appreciate it. And I think it's a great transition now to our next two speakers, which will be talking about practical tools that you can use to meet these obligations under the German Supply Chain Act, both by amfori and by the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Erika Sock, our senior program expert at amfori. And in the meantime, Michaela will also try to address any questions that were already posted in the chat. But please now let's focus on Erika's presentation. So Erika, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here on the Monday morning. So maybe we can already go to the next slide. So to complement on Linda's introduction on amfori, in 2020, amfori took position in defending EU-wide legislation on HIDD, fostering a level playing field for companies operating in Europe. And in 2021, amfori initiated an assessment of its services against the German Supply Chain Act to answer to the following question: how can amfori best support its member in navigating HIDD requirements, and where do we have gaps? We can go to the next slide. So following the mapping of amfori services, next. Thanks. Following the mapping of amfori services against the OECD steps, one of our conclusions was that, well, amfori tool, if used it in full extent, can cover the different due diligence steps a company is expected to carry out. So you can see, well, you will have the slide, so you will see the different elements, different requirements, but also the different tools that can be used for each step. Another conclusion was that our services are relevant and very much adapted to smaller size companies, so SMEs. And this is really thanks to the collective and the cooperative approach of our tools and services. I'm taking the example of the amfori Code of Conduct, which provides a comprehensive set of commitment and guidances as to how to implement and monitor due diligence obligation in supply chain. As the second step, the country risk classification and self-assessment are designed to help identifying risks, and company can pull out metrics and indicators from amfori insights. Again, I will not go through all items, you will have those slides, but maybe one important point to mention here, and as the slide title says, amfori is part of an ecosystem. So the intention here is not to do everything, and in this sense, collaboration is key to avoid duplication and really add value to our members, to companies, but to the ecosystem as well. So collaboration, of course, among members, among different type of members, different size of members, but also collaboration with other organizations to strengthen the company's impact and really advancing hand in hand in human rights and environmental due diligence. So an example, the next speaker might also mention it, but I can mention here the collaboration protocol we have with PST and Fairware, and the amfori supply chain grievance mechanism to jointly address workers' grievances from shared factories in our various member brands. So that's, I think, a very interesting step moving forward, knowing that we won't be able to cover every country, every sector, every issues in supply chain. So the more we collaborate, the wider will be the impact. Next slide. Maybe 4 elements I wanted to put the focus on as ongoing work, and which are moving in this direction with the HIDD and the legislation direction. So the amfori BSCI system manual, so our social program basically, is currently being revised with the objective to further align with the OECD responsible business conduct framework. The new Code of Conduct was released in 2021 with, again, a higher level of alignment, and the access to remedy element of the system was strengthened, especially with the operational grievance mechanism, but also with our Speak for Change program, so our supply chain grievance mechanism program. The launch of the new environmental program and amfori BPI this year has a really strong emphasis on risk identification process. We are also developing a code of conduct for our environmental program, again, to increase transparency of companies' commitment towards environmental impact. Grievance mechanism, maybe to give a little bit of an update as well, our supply chain grievance mechanism was launched in Vietnam more than a year ago, was piloted there. We are ending the pilot, and the scale up in other countries is planned in 2023. So in Turkey, Bangladesh, and India. A fourth pillar is transparency, and I think there was a lot of questions around transparency in different point of view as well. So we are aiming as well in increasing transparency functionality, especially on our digital platform, but also in general in the collaboration we have. So we have the multi-tier functionality to get more visibility in your supply chain beyond the first year. So what the German legislation refers to indirect suppliers, so going really beyond tier 1. This functionality is already active for farms and allow to map, monitor, and track data at farm level. Access to data in your supply chain, very important, I think, to report, but also to understand where is your impact. We are again improving this functionality in console, well, giving as many metrics and indicators as possible to companies, so they can get those information, translate those information, and also create a narrative behind the reporting, the sustainability reporting. And finally, maybe another collaboration we are having with Open Supply Hub, which was previously named the Open Apparel Registry, to enhance transparency and comparability. I don't know if you can say it this way: comparability, and exchangeability of data in company supply chain. Next slide. This is an example of a tool we have in our system, which benchmark amfori services. So as I said in the beginning, we've done this exercise of benchmarking amfori services against the German Supply Chain Act, section per section, clause by clause, and see how we can match certain element of our system with the requirement, and how can we help companies in this sense. So the assessment of BSCI and BEPI against the German Supply Chain Act was done last year. It should probably be done again next year, as we are continuously updating our tools to be relevant, but also because the legislative landscape is constantly evolving and we need to adapt accordingly. So this is a snapshot of the tool in our system, which allow members to access first to the legislation itself. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So there's really a real snapshot of the tool. So there's a snapshot of the tool in our system. You can access, as I said, to the legislation, as well as to the relevant tool or services at amfori. And when the tool is not able to fully cover the requirement, where do we have gaps? Next slide. Next and final slide. So what's new? As I said before, the exercise also helped us identifying gaps and work on areas where we need more support. As I said as well, the intention is not to do everything. So on one side, we are trying to filling up those gaps. On the other side, we're collaborating. So three, let's say, work stream we are having at the moment when it comes to consolidating our tools. First one is the risk assessment tool. So the risk assessment tool is built on what we have now as the country risk classification and the country due diligence tool. So we are currently developing a tool which will support company going through the different stages of risk assessment, from identification to prioritization and management. I will directly jump maybe on the third one, because I think there was some interest in especially questions for sourcing countries and suppliers. But amfori has an academy with quite a lot of quite a wide portfolio of trainings already. But to help members and business partner navigating through those trainings, we have developed an HIDD capacity building journey. So there's a journey for the member, which is already available on the academy, and which will continuously be populated with new needed trainings for companies, for members. But we also have a business partner journey. So companies, so what we call business partner being suppliers in sourcing countries. And so for those business partners starting to get to know what is happening in Europe in terms of legislation, what are the requirements, it was important for us to already prepare those suppliers and create some awareness, increase knowledge on what are the ongoing discussion on the EU market. So they are directly impacted, and they will be probably the front line of all due diligence effort from companies. So it was very important to focus in this area. As an example, I can say that in India, there's a collaboration with UNDP and the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce in developing specific human rights and environmental due diligence trainings in specific sectors. So that's the first step. There will be more next year. But yeah, that's what's new. I'm done. So if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Erica. Great presentation. Before we move on, or maybe we do move on to Isabel, there's a bunch of questions. I would propose that we do a joint Q&A and still collect further questions. And then Isabel, maybe you give your presentation, and then we move on to Q&A before we end with Andreas' closing remarks. So Isabel, please.
Yes, sounds good. Hello, good morning, and we're happy to co-host this webinar with amfori. So maybe jump directly to the next slide. So what I'm going to do, and maybe just please allow me to make some general remarks on the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, or known also as Textilbündnis, for those of you who might not be familiar, though I know that there are also a lot of members in this webinar. So basically what we are a multi-stakeholder initiative, initiative committed to a social, ecological and corruption-free textile and garment industry, currently around 127 members from different stakeholder groups, including companies and associations, but also non-governmental organizations, standard-setting organizations, unions, and the German federal government. And basically, and this is fairly new, our work is structured along 3 elements. The first one is implementing due diligence. So basically where we ask our member companies to publicly demonstrate on a regular basis how they implement their due diligence obligations. And we have done so also in previous years, so before the German Supply Chain Act was in place, and ask our members to focus on doing a systematic risk analysis, and then also define targets in order to address risks and initiate improvement. And as we have had these basically obligation to support on due diligence in the past, we have also developed a large amount of guidance and online trainings, for example, on specific sector risks, but also on how to conduct a risk analysis in general, or on how to set up an effective monitoring system. So maybe a last remark concerning that very first element. In the future, companies that are reporting under the German Supply Chain Act, they will not have to complete the partnership's own reporting process, but especially for those companies that are not covered by the German Supply Chain Act or any other, let's say, legislation yet, we do provide a great first point of contact in order to get started with due diligence reporting, and maybe also to prepare yourself for future reporting under a legal framework. Then regarding the second element, which is called supply chain transparency. So basically we ask our members to provide us with a list of their tier 1 suppliers that will be then published in an aggregated list of the production sites at the Open Supply Hub. So this is what we're doing at the moment, but then also in the future, we are basically committed to supporting our members in also increasing transparency in the deeper supply chain. And now the third element, and that's what I'm also going to focus on within the next 2 slides, is that basically we identify 4 topics that we really want to focus on in the future, and those are living wages and purchasing practices, circular economy and climate protection, gender equality, as well as grievance mechanisms and remedy. And for each of these 4 topics, we have basically set forth a common framework, which is based on international standards and kind of gives us the goals that we ultimately want to achieve. Then there are individual commitments with key performance indicators for each topic that enables us, but also our members, to measure progress on these topics, and then we bring together our multi-stakeholders and implement joint projects on the ground in production countries focusing on these topics. And this is also what I would like to talk a bit more about now. So maybe next slide, please. Yes, so basically what we do, and where we also see one of our benefits, is that we provide the infrastructure for joint projects on the ground, supporting our members in meeting their due diligence obligations through joint effort. And these projects that will be implemented, they're always implemented by a group of partnership members from different stakeholder groups, but they ultimately linked to a company's risk analysis, as I said before, implemented in production countries. And also, that might be interesting for some of you, they are also eligible for public sector contributions if criteria are met. So if you are more interested in this part of our work, please feel free to reach out afterwards. And basically what I'm trying to say here, and what the link is also to the German Supply Chain Act, that from our understanding, taking part in these joint projects, especially because they are linked to the company's risk analysis, it's part of taking preventative measures, or also remedial action, as to prevent and or minimize an extent of a violation. And then next slide, please. I would like to talk a bit more on our work with regards to grievance mechanisms and remedy. Just to remind you, the German Supply Chain Act requires enterprises to ensure that there's an appropriate internal complaints procedure in place, either by setting up an own procedure or by participating in an appropriate external complaint procedure. And in general, our approach here is that we do, as the partnership, we do not operate our own cross-company grievance mechanism, because we do believe that this would only add to the current fragmented system of grievance channels that are out there. But instead, what we do is we collaborate with other multi-stakeholder initiatives. And the first one that I would like to, or what I would like to say in general before maybe looking at two projects more in detail, is that we work together on access to remedy with other multi-stakeholder initiatives such as Fairware, also amfori, FLA, in order to identify synergies and align on approaches. And one of the objectives here is really to support member companies in providing access to remedy. And this basically working group is also now known as the CARI platform. Then what we have done in the past, and what we will scale up in the future, is our work together with Fairware. So that's a really concrete project that is in place, where basically our member brands can also access the Fairware grievance mechanism. This currently is taking place in Vietnam and India as two countries, but will, as I said before, also in the future scale up to more countries. So this is a great project that we have set up in making this grievance mechanism available also to our members. And then, and this is what Erica already mentioned, working together with Fairware, but also amfori, aiming at the effective handling from shared factories. This is where we have established a common procedure, or also a protocol. So basically now when a complaint is raised in one factory by one member, but there are also other members sourcing from that factory, we make sure that every member in these MSIs is well informed, and there can be also a joint response to that. So this has been a great project being set up by now these three multi-stakeholder initiatives. And maybe just to sum up also, because we're running out of time. So as I said before, we're trying really to work together with other MSIs and see which grievance mechanisms are already out there, knowing that there's no real one-size-fits-all approach here. But what we also always do is really support our members. So if there are individual, let's say, questions on how to set up grievance mechanisms, or where to join, then also please feel free to get in touch if you're interested in learning further about our work here. So I try to be short, Francis, and leave time for questions if there are any. This is it.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Greatly appreciate it. Many questions are already being answered in writing, but I'm not sure everybody's monitoring the chat, so maybe I will just briefly read out some of those questions and the answers to them. So there was a question when it comes to the rollout of the supply chain grievance mechanism or the scale up rather, in which countries. Indeed, India, Bangladesh, and Turkey are the countries where we're rolling this out. Cambodia is under consideration for a later stage. Then, how can you as an amfori member participate in the Speak for Change program? Well, I already hinted at it. You have to be an amfori member, but also signatory of BSCI, of course. So in that sense, also linked to a grievance, or you will be only contacted if you're linked to a grievance that happens in the factory that you are linked to. If you want really specific details, also on the operating procedure and so on, you can just access this information on our website. I included the link here in the chat, as well as our email to the colleagues that are in charge of the rollout of the supply chain grievance mechanism. Then there was a question on a detailed overview of what amfori fulfills and what it doesn't. So when it comes to the comparison between the German Supply Chain Act and our tools, so basically what Erica presented, this is actually available on the sustainability platform. So as an amfori member, you can see all the detailed legislation and compared to it, how our tools match or can support with these different expectations. So just log into the sustainability platform. If you have specific questions where exactly to find it or you can't find it, don't hesitate to just send an email to us, info@ or just us directly. Regarding multi-tier, there was a question when this will be available for non-farm companies. That is something that we're currently looking into very much, so that will come possibly in 2023. But that's indeed for now, multi-tier is available for farms. And we have to do some legwork still to get this scaled to all the different sectors. Then there was a question on when will the complaints mechanisms be extended to all sourcing countries. Again, this is something we need to, of course, prioritize countries, because we can't just roll that out everywhere, or at least not in a way that would allow the quality of the process to not be compromised. So in that sense, we're focusing really on the key sourcing countries of our members. That's why, of course, India, Bangladesh, Turkey are the focus for 2023. And then also, Isabel already alluded to it, we have a collaboration with the Textile Bündnis and Fair Wear to really, leverage their grievance mechanisms also, and to come together when there's grievances that happen in factories that are in both of our members' supply chains. Now, then there was a question on access to the grievance mechanism in Bangladesh. It's the same thing. If you're an amfori member, you'll be able to, to connect. And I think from questions, then there was another question to Michaela about the reporting obligations. So the question was or the member had or the company has 100% subsidiary company for purchasing located in China and Vietnam with around 300 employees. And the question is if they have to fill out the questionnaire and generate their own reports, even if they link to the report of the head office in Germany, or if the German head office covers the subsidiary with its report and questionnaire. And the answer is the subsidiaries do not fall within the scope of the law, or are not governed by the reporting obligations and don't have to report to the BAFA, and their parent companies might be obliged to do that due diligence there if they're part of their own operations and thus report on the activities there. So that's Michaela's answer. One last question. If it's planned that the amfori tools will cover the complete spectrum of the new German law, multi-tier, partially non-covered scores, I think here what's important is, of course, it serves a little bit as a gap analysis for us, but we also do not claim to offer you everything that you need to comply with the legislation. What we really focus on is to also leverage partnerships with other organizations where we might have gap. We might, if we don't find the right fit, innovate and develop new solutions. But also what keeps us, or what's our guidance here is really the UN guiding principles and the OECD guidelines. So we try to offer tools that help you meet those. And we try to do that in close collaboration with our partners. So we do not want to reinvent the wheel when there's good solutions out there already. It can happen also through partnerships. But ultimately, the obligation to meet these Global Supply Chain Act or other due diligence legislation, also European legislation in the future, being a member of amfori does not mean that you are in compliance with this. Ultimately, it's still a company's responsibility to do their due diligence, and of course, we can offer you the tools and enable you to actually fulfill those requirements. Now, having said that, I don't see any further questions here. There is maybe just one last thing I want to say. Indeed, Isabel, this is a webinar that was co-hosted by the German PST and amfori. Sorry if I forgot mentioning this in the beginning, but also a big thanks to the German PST at this stage. And with that in mind, I will pass on to Andreas Edele for the closing remarks. And sorry for giving you so little time. Maybe we can run over by a few minutes so that you get sufficient time for your closing remarks. Thank you so much. And Andreas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Francis. Also from my side, good morning. I want to send you greetings from Noah Naqshbandi, the head of the Secretariat of the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. He's very sad he cannot be here. My name is Andreas Edele. I am responsible for the coordination of the cooperation agreements that we have with the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles with other initiatives. First of all, I also want to thank amfori for the cooperation to organize this, and of course also the help desk for the very well prepared input. I just want to echo what Linda said at the beginning. Linda, you said that the smart mix of measures is very important for effective implementation of due diligence. And you pointed out the importance of initiatives such as amfori or the partnership as a platform for collective leverage, and you hinted to the power of cooperation. And I would just like to echo that. I mean, Isabel presented the work of the partnership. The members of the partnership who are here now know that the work in the PST has been very much based on the due diligence approach as defined by UN guiding principles and specified by the OECD due diligence guidance. We had an OECD alignment assessment in 2019 and adapted our approach after that. So we think that PST members are very well prepared for the obligations that are coming up under the German Due Diligence Act. But reporting, of course, is one thing. You can only report what you have implemented as a company. And as you said, Linda, I think it's important to see this new legal obligations as an opportunity to contribute and achieve positive change. I think that's what all we want. What we want is really to achieve change, positive change on the ground. And everybody here that presented stressed the importance of collaboration to achieve change on the ground. We presented a number of initiatives that are going on, collaboration between members, collaboration between initiatives, including Fairware, amfori, PST in the area of access to remedy and grievance mechanisms, cooperation with the Open Supply Hub that we also cooperate with. But there are other stakeholders out there, initiatives such as Textile Exchange, ZDHC, SAC, and that contribute to this positive change on the ground. And what we really want to achieve now in this, let's say, next phase also in terms of the PST with the new strategy that Isabel presented is focusing really on impact on the ground, joint projects. And I want to invite all members of the PST, but of course also members of other initiatives such as amfori to join together, join forces to achieve positive change. And as you said, Linda, to invite all of you to see this changing regulatory environment as an opportunity to contribute for positive change. There are other legal changes coming up. The due diligence area is one of them. The EU textile strategy has a number of other initiatives at the EU level coming up. So if you as a company want to be ahead of the curve, I think it's good to join forces in initiatives such as amfori and the PST going into the future. So in this sense, thanks again to all organizations and presenters, and I wish you a good Monday.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andreas. Thank you to all the panelists for these great contributions. Really appreciate the time that you took, and also, of course, thank you to the participants for paying attention and asking so many great questions. We will follow up with the recording and also the Q&A write-up, and also, of course, the slides. And we'll certainly be in touch with the panelists for a potential follow-up webinars. One of the things that we heard today that are really critical and on everybody's mind are, I think, on the one hand, of course, how the legislation impacts companies not located in Germany, but then also, of course, how can we facilitate collective action and what partnerships can we create to really make a difference in preventing and remediating adverse impacts on human rights or the environment, which shouldn't be forgotten, of course, and is also a key component of our offering, as Erica showed through amfori BAPI. So thank you very much, all of you. I wish you almost a nice Christmas break and a good start into the new year, if we can say that already, beginning of December. So thank you, everybody, and speak to you soon. Bye.